The best clinical supervisors I know stop trying to have all the answers. They stopped performing expertise, and they started doing something that most of us were never really taught to do. They let their supervisees be human first. Because, of course, we're trained to supervise cases, right? But we're so often not trained to support the person holding those cases. And in trauma work, that gap shows up fast. And hold on, real quick, before we get into this. Hi, I'm Jenny Hughes, trauma psychologist and founder of the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective, which is a space where we make sure that trauma therapists have something left for themselves at the end of each day. And today, I want to talk about something really important to me, 10 ways clinical supervisors can actually support the trauma therapists that they work with, not just supervise them, but support them, because those are not the same thing. If you're a clinical supervisor, I really want to hear from you in the comments. What's one thing that you wish someone had told you about supervising trauma therapists? And if you're a trauma therapist watching this, what's one thing that you wish your current or past supervisor understood? Let's learn from each other. Check out what everyone is sharing because it is valuable information. And regardless of whether you're a supervisor or supervisee, if you're looking for a tool to help you track what you're carrying, supervisors, you can use this with your supervisees. Supervisees, bring it to supervision and teach it to your supervisor. That's so powerful. Oh, I didn't tell you what it was yet. I made a free Vicarious trauma tracker for you. It also has a bonus mini course that goes with it. And it's a really simple way to start naming the impact of this work without pathologizing it. The link's down there in the description, and let's just get right into it, okay? Number 1, let them be human first, therapist second. There's a phrase from the reflective supervision literature that I come back to all the time. How you are is as important as what you do. Listen to that again. How you are is as important as what you do. I love that so much, because it totally reframes what supervision is even for. And it's something that has stuck with me since my training in infant mental health, where reflective supervision originated. And for anyone doing trauma work, how are you means creating space for your supervisees to not be okay sometimes. And not treating that as a performance problem. It's not that they're going to get dinged on their eval because they're affected by this work. And not treating it as something to manage or fix, just letting it be true. In infant mental health, one term we use is be with. Just let it be true and be with it with your supervisees, because they're walking into rooms with people who have survived the worst things that humans do to each other. And this might be the first time that your supervisee is hearing this stuff, right? They're holding stories that would flatten most people. It probably flattened you early on too. And that's okay. I do not say that with judgment. But then they're expected to show up the next hour and just do it again. So if your supervision only has room for them to perform competence, they will perform competence. But they won't tell you when they're drowning. They won't tell you when a case is following them home. They won't tell you when they're starting to question whether they're cut out for this work or not. And then you lose them. Not because they or you weren't capable, but because it wasn't safe for them to be human. Number 2, stop performing expertise. I know it might feel real counterintuitive because obviously you're the supervisor, you're supposed to know things, but here's what the research on parallel process shows us. How you show up in supervision gets carried into the therapy room, right? Parallel process is this idea that dynamics flow in both directions. So what happens between the client and the therapist often shows up between the therapist and the supervisor, which means what happens between the supervisor and the therapist is going to get carried right back into the work with the client in therapy. So if you model certainty and control, that's what your supervisees will feel pressure to perform with you and with their clients. If you model curiosity, uncertainty, I don't know, let's think about this together. You give them permission to be learners, not performers. The best supervisors I've had were the ones who said things like, "That's a hard one. I'm not sure either. Let's sit with it." That didn't make me trust them less. It 100% made me trust them more because it meant I could bring the cases I didn't have figured out, the ones that were keeping me up at night, instead of only bringing the cases where I already knew the answer and just needed validation. Number 3, separate the case from the clinician. Traditional supervision was built around case consultation. You bring a case, we talk about the case, we make a plan for the case. And that's for sure an important part of the work. But when we look at the trauma-informed supervision literature, it adds a whole other layer. How is the person holding the case? These are two very different conversations, and often supervision only addresses one. You can have a supervisee who is doing all the things right clinically, using the right interventions, conceptualizing accurately, documenting well, and they can still be slowly drowning under the weight of what they're holding in their work. If you never ask about the second layer, you won't know how they're actually doing. And by the time it becomes obvious, it's often too late. And I've been there with this one as a supervisor, and I had to learn a lot the hard way and fast because I had started to take this one for granted in my work with my supervisees. You better believe it's central to almost every supervision meeting now, though, in my work. So build this into how you do supervision, okay? Supervise the case and check in on the person holding the case. Make both of those normal. Make them both expected. Okay, if any of this is landing for you, will you drop a heart emoji in the comments real quick? And as you have questions, drop those too. I read and respond to all of your comments. All right, number 4, ask how the work is landing in their body. I know this is a bit of a cliche, but you also know how important it is, and it's a natural extension of number 3. The intention here is to encourage you to change the questions you ask. How are you? Gets a professional answer. I'm fine, busy, but fine. That's not information, it's a script. But where are you noticing this case in your body gets a pause and then a much more real answer. Oh God, I guess my shoulders have been up around my ears all week. Ugh, I've had such a headache since that session on Tuesday. I keep holding my breath when I think about seeing them next week. Reflective supervision is built on this idea that self-awareness is what allows therapists to stay present with clients instead of getting hijacked by the material. If your supervisees can notice what's happening in their own nervous system, they can work with it. If they can't, it runs the show. And you can model this, okay? You can say, I'm noticing I'm feeling really activated hearing about this case. What's that about? Or, I felt that right in the pit of my stomach. You too? You can then make the parallel process and the body active parts of the conversation instead of pretending we're all just brains floating around in supervision. Number 5, normalize vicarious trauma out loud. If you know me at all, you know this is a hill I will die on till the end of days. And I want you to say this before they have to admit it. This kind of case affects people. It would be strange if it didn't, right? Or hearing about childhood sexual abuse week after week is going to land somewhere in your system. That's not weakness, saying to your supervisee. That's being human. Or you could say, you've been holding a lot of grief this month with your cases. That builds up, okay? Research shows that therapists often avoid bringing up the hardest parts of work in supervision, the cases that are haunting them, the sessions that went sideways, the moments where they felt like they had no idea what they were doing, even though those are exactly the parts that they need support with. They avoid it because it doesn't feel safe, because they're not sure how it will be received, because they've internalized the idea that struggling means something is wrong with them. It's something that they have to keep secret. You have to make it safe to name. And sometimes that means naming it yourself first, okay? Number 6, don't pathologize their reactions. So once you name vicarious trauma in supervision, you then have to receive and deal with whatever your supervisee shares, right? So please remember that being affected by trauma work is not a clinical problem to solve. It's not a deficit to correct. It's evidence of empathic engagement. Now, the old models of supervision were real deficit-based. The goal was to figure out what's going wrong and how to fix it. But trauma-informed supervision moves in a totally different direction towards a strength-based relational model where the goal is not to fix the person, but to help them make sense of their experience. When your supervisee tells you they cried in their car after a session, the response is not, oh, we need to work on your boundaries. The response is, that makes sense. You just held something enormous. What do you need right now? When they tell you a case is following them home, the response is not, oh, well, you need better compartmentalization. The response is, yeah, of course it is. Let's talk about what kind of support would help right now. Their reactions make sense. Help them see that. Because the shame of thinking something is wrong with them is way worse than the vicarious trauma itself. Number 7, watch for the signs that they're carrying too much. Your supervisees are not always going to tell you when they're struggling. We've talked about that in this video. And some of them don't even know when it's happening. They've normalized it so deeply that they can't see it anymore. So you have to watch out for it. It could be withdrawal, cynicism that wasn't there before, over-functioning and trying to control everything because everything feels out of control, sudden detachment, or going flat in a way that doesn't match who they usually are. These are not performance issues. They're signals. And supervisors are often the first people positioned to see them. The research on secondary traumatic stress is clear. The accumulation of exposure matters. It's not about one bad case. It's about the slow buildup over months and years of this stuff. And by the time someone is in full burnout, the damage takes a long time to undo. So if you can catch it earlier, you can intervene earlier. But that requires paying attention, not just to the work they're doing, but to how they're doing while they do it. Number 8, make it safe to struggle without career consequences. This one is about trust. And trust is built over time through consistent action. And here's what we know from the literature. If admitting struggle feels risky, clinicians are not going to do it. If they think being honest about how hard it is will affect their evaluation, their reputation, their job security or potential, they're going to keep it to themselves. And then they burn out in silence. Your response to vulnerability sets the culture. When someone takes a risk and tells you they're not okay, what happens next matters more than almost anything else you do as a supervisor. If you meet it with concern and support, they'll come back. If you meet it with worry about their competence, they will not. And neither will anyone else who's watching or hears about it. The research on supervision quality is interesting here. It's not about how many hours of supervision someone gets. It's actually about how supportive that supervision feels. So perceived supportiveness predicts compassion satisfaction, and low perceived support predicts burnout. So the question is not, am I providing enough supervision? The question is, does my supervision feel safe enough to be honest in? Number 9, protect their caseload when you can. This is a big systemic one. It's not as relational as a lot of the other ones, and it matters. And sometimes the most supportive thing a supervisor can do is not hold more space emotionally. It's to fight for structural change, to advocate for reasonable trauma caseload distribution, to push back when someone is being assigned back-to-back high acuity cases with no buffer. So notice when the same clinician keeps getting the hardest cases because they're really good at them, and ask whether that's sustainable. Ask them whether it's sustainable. I know you may not have full control over this. A lot of us don't, but you have more influence than you think and way more than your supervisee. And using that influence on behalf of your supervisee is part of your job. It's not enough to help someone process vicarious trauma or talk about their cases if the structure they're working in keeps creating more of it. At some point, the system has to change, not just the person's ability to cope with it. All right, last one, number 10. Connect them with community beyond just you. This last one might be the most important in my opinion. One supervision relationship is not enough to hold trauma work, right? It's 1, maybe 2 hours a week compared to all the hours of work that they're doing. You cannot be everything to your supervisees, just like we cannot be everything to the clients we serve as therapists. And you shouldn't try to be. The research here is clear, okay? Peer support matters. Consultation and communities matter. Spaces where therapists can be met by others who get it, who are doing the same work, who understand without needing an explanation. Part of your job as a supervisor is pointing them towards those spaces, right? Encouraging them to find their people, normalizing the idea that they need more support than you alone can provide. This isn't a failure on your part. It's just the truth about trauma work. It was never meant to be held alone, not by the people we serve and not by us. So here's what I want you to take away. You don't have to be a perfect supervisor. There's no such thing. You don't have to have all the answers. What your supervisees need most is permission to be human while they do impossibly hard work that they probably love. And that permission starts with you. What the research keeps showing us over and over again is that the quality of supervision matters more than the quantity. How supportive and safe it feels matters more than how many hours you spend together. And that's actually good news. It means small shifts in how you show up can make a real difference for your supervisees. If you are a supervisor, I hope this gave you something to sit with. And if you're a clinician who watched this and thought, oh, I wish my supervision felt like that, I want you to know that's important information. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you for wanting more. It means you know what you need. And if you're not getting it in supervision, that's a gap worth filling somewhere else. It could be through peer consultation, community spaces where you can actually be honest about what this work costs, right? You deserve support that matches the weight of what you're holding. Now, before we end, take a breath. Notice where you're holding tension right now. Bring your shoulders up to your ears and let them drop. You're doing harder work than most people will ever understand, and you do not have to do it alone. If you are looking for a community where trauma therapists come to be human together, that's what Brave is. It's not just for therapists. We have supervisors and students in there too, who are all figuring this out alongside each other. The link's in the description if you want to check it out, and I'll see you in the next video.